people have about Easter Island. But again, wherever you see these megalithic marvels, there's always something else going on, right? And so as I began to study Easter Island, I just began to learn some crazy stuff. So I'll give you some just basics. So Easter Island is situated on the Nazca Plate. It's a volcanic tectonic hotspot west of South America. And the surface of the island is just like 63 miles. So it's a pretty small island, but it's literally, it's the most remote inhabited island on the planet. Okay, so that right there is kind of interesting, right? And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And so it's a big deal. And in 1722, the first European ever recorded who have set foot on Easter Island was this Dutch explorer named Jacob Roggeveen. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And he was originally on his way to find this other fabled land that was supposed to exist. And instead, he runs into the Polynesian name for the island was Rapa Nui. And he named it Easter Island because his ship landed there on Easter Sunday, April 5th. Imagine that. And so I love to find like this Jacob Roggeveen's, you know, his ship logs, and you start reading through and you pull out all the stuff that is not, you know, necessarily politically correct that you would read from today's secular researchers, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Because these guys, they weren't politically correct, you know, and so he talks about, I break down in my first blog post some of the crazy, almost cultic dances that Roggeveen references that he saw the natives doing, and how they were blown away at these statues. And but again, you'd have to read the blog to really get the full brunt of it. But the crazy thing is about it is, how did this civilization out in the middle of nowhere come up with their own, you know, they have their own tablets. They basically had like their own almost Egyptian hieroglyphs that they had written. And when you start studying the oral tradition of these Eastern Islanders, they say that the megalithic statues known as the Moai, they say in their oral traditions that they were representations of chiefly deified ancestors. Right? And so you ask yourself, who were these ancestors, right? And when you look at the features of the Moai, I mean, elongated heads and weird-shaped bodies. And then what's really fascinating, I'm going to break this down in one of my next blog posts, is just like we see in Peru at Sacsayhuaman and these other sites, guess what's on Easter Island? You have these megalithic, polygonal, mortarless construction walls. And that's one thing that is often not known about Easter Island, is that these same walls are there. And again, wherever these megalithic walls are, and I'm going to have pictures of them, again, I believe those were built by the giants, okay? And so if you've got megalithic walls on Easter Island, then you got to ask yourself, do we really believe, like conventional, you know, archaeology tells us, that the Eastern Islanders just simply chiseled these out of the volcano and somehow carried them miles to their destination?
Well, they talk about these chiefly deified ancestors, and I think the wording there is kind of telling. Chiefly deified. I mean, we know what ancestors are, obviously, but they're ancient, chiefly deified ancestors. That's what they're called. The only thing that comes to mind is hybrids. Hybrids. I mean, because the humans there are ancestors of these entities, these beings, and they're chiefly deified. They were at least chiefly deified in their culture on their land. All I could think about is these are part human, part fallen angel. That's the only thing that I could even make sense. I mean, the wording itself seems to explain itself. But if you're dealing with an island where these ancestors, we'll just say the government, if you want to call it the government of the island, or the hierarchy, is made up of these highly regarded megalithic hybrid gods, these chiefly deified ancestors, it answers all the questions right there. I mean, this is where you're getting everything that you see on the island. And going further than that, I just want to comment on the features. Anybody who's Googled, Easter Island, or maybe seen a documentary on, Discovery or Travel Channel or whatever, you're going to notice the features of these things. They're very creepy looking. I mean, they don't look like normal humans. They don't look like a normal Nephilim, at least as far as, the mind would portray. Right. But there's something very strange about them. They're odd looking.
Yeah, very interesting. And I'm really excited for part 2 of this series. And the news has been leaking out the last, 10 years about the full bodies of the Moai statues. But for most of this century, the 1900s, even in the 1800s, since Roggeveen was there, people have just assumed they were mostly just big heads, down to the necks, and that was it. Until archaeologists started to dig and realized these have full bodies. Have you seen the pictures?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. And I mean, these are detailed bodies. It's not like the bottom is just a big blob of rock. I mean, they've got fingers and they've got hieroglyphs on their backs. And so, I mean, these are advanced carvings. And it's crazy because many of the Moai, and there's a different name for these ones, but they've got like red hats on them. And when you really start to study this, it's almost like the makers of these Moai were trying to fashion them with the red hair of these elongated skulls that we see in Peru on the mainland. And so, obviously, like Brian Forster and many people have really brought the elongated skulls of Peru, to light. And it's crazy how, DNA analysis of those recently has proved that it wasn't just cradle headboarding, right? When you look at these crazy elongated skulls, this is a quick rabbit trail, these crazy elongated skulls, some of them that still have this red hair on them, the cranial volume is up 25% larger and 60% heavier than conventional human skulls, meaning they could not have been just intentionally deformed through headboarding, right? And most of them also contain one parietal plate rather than the normal two. And so, obviously, again, in Peru, one of the best sites on earth to see megalithic marvels, but it's interesting how there you also have this genetic manipulation of these crazy elongated skulls, and then that that's not too far from Easter Island. And then when you discover that Easter Island has these same megalithic walls, and some of the statues have these red-haired hats, it's crazy. And then I'm really excited in part 3, Justin. I've discovered some research from reading through ship logs of other explorers that went there after Roggeveen, and I am learning some mind-blowing stuff. Let me just give you a teaser. Let's just say some of the sailors that went to this island reported seeing giants.
And what was the time frame of this? Like, what was the estimated date of these sightings?
That would have been the early 1800s, but there's actually documented reports of sailors seeing, we're talking live giants on Easter Island.
And it doesn't mean that there's not giants roaming the land other places, but we have to understand that when you're in these massive populated areas where there's a lot of humans, normal humans, I should say, the giants aren't just out in the open. I mean, we're dealing with underground cities. The elite know where the giants are. I believe that the elite are in league with the giants because the giants have always been in power. The Nephilim bloodlines have always been in power. Literally since their creation, they have been in power. And many of the ancient traditions teach that the gods, which we know to be the fallen angels, that they came up. Many cultures teach that they lived inside the earth, that they would come up from, even though they taught mankind that they came from other galaxies, they live inside the earth in these subterranean cities. Many times they would come up, they would take wives, they would create these hybrid offspring, And then they would basically teach their offspring, the Nephilim, they would teach them how to run things as a government, as literally, as tyrants. And then the Watchers or the fallen angels, whatever you want to call them, people, they would go back underground, and then they would come up only when they were needed or when they needed to check on things. So basically, the Nephilim were set up as a hierarchy to be the rulers of this world. And this is in many cultures, in many traditions. And so the giants, I believe, based on where we are today in history with prophecy, on the biblical timeline, I believe that for the most part, giants are inhabiting the subterranean cities. But they do still come up. We've got information that's connecting the Vatican having massive underground cities where there are hybrid giants living beneath the surface of the Vatican. And they do come out from time to time. There are situations where government officials have talked about some of these large-headed giants with big blue eyes coming up to certain World Bank meetings. We're not talking about conspiracy theory here. The giants are here. The giants have not all died out. The giants, and not to mention giants, if they're attacked, giants are not easy to kill. The true giants. Ellie Marzulli was telling me when we were hanging out when he was in town and doing a little talk, and he said that giants, a lot of the accounts he's hearing about, they have a quality of regeneration. They have wounds that tend to heal. They heal in a different way than humans. And so it's kind of interesting that David knew that he had to cut the head off of Goliath.
That is crazy stuff to think about.
A lot of people come into contact with these inhabitants. A lot of sailors, a lot of explorers, especially back in the days when